Chapter 60, Altered Human, Part 1-2. Luo Nan's soul body just towered within the reckless and bursting flood of emotions. He ought to have been angry, but he had a special viewing angle. He looked at Rui Wen stand atop the fighting stage in silence after she had spoken, and he saw her spiritual seed remain untainted from beginning to end within the flood of turbid emotions. A marvelous tranquility had arrived, and so Luo Nan was like this. He overlooked the stage from above, looking down coldly at several hundred warped faces. His mental senses were a relaxed giant net that allowed nothing to escape. They covered every nook and cranny within a range of a 500-meter radius, and his senses captured each person's mood and inclination. The vast majority of people were feverish, but there would always be some people who were more special. For instance, there was someone who was a bit fretful. Luo Nan's shifted the focus of his attention. A male dressed in a Western suit was in one of the VIP boxes of the fighting arena. He was pacing back and forth, shouting, "Jack, Jack, hell, I know you can hear me." The static was extremely distinct and noisy within the high-priority call. Then 2 seconds later, a voice came through, "What's going on?" "Found him." Luo Nan focused his attention instantly, increasing his precision in all aspects. But he still felt that this wasn't enough. He simply had his soul body move over there as well. And so he was in the VIP room, sticking to the nape of this contact and receiving the information coming from the communications device. The contact was excited to finally get in touch with this damned Jack. In any case, this contact would have never thought that there would be a spirit haunting his back and eavesdropping the same information in synchrony. In fact, the information Luo Nan received exceeded the information the contact received. After heightening his senses, Luo Nan could see things besides material objects. He could capture the closely woven radio waves interweaving through the air. Since Luo Nan lacked the ability to convert and decode electromagnetic waves, it was impossible for Luo Nan to know what information was transmitted through the air. But he could refer to the crisscross spread of oscillations internal and external to the communications device to form approximate judgments. The first time he did this was when he wanted to trace information about the society from the countless crisscrossing alternating currents of the hexaria. But this time, it wasn't as easy. Fortunately, the communications between the contact and Jack were still going. The contact did his best in explaining the details of the current events to Jack. The static noise of interference continued to ring all this time. The call quality was extremely bad. In the end, even the contact didn't know what they were talking about. "Damn it, Jack, where the hell are you? I'm on the stairway to heaven." It was as if Jack was working out. He was panting a bit. "Now's not the time for jokes. You need to come back ASAP. I'm just about to reach heaven." "What heaven?" Rui Wen barged onto the road of verdicts. "It's Rui Wen, Rui Wen. Didn't you say that any information regarding this woman must be reported to you immediately?" The Jack went silent for a full 5 seconds on the other side before responding. "Who are the first 2 barriers?" The contact was happy to see that Jack had understood the severity of the situation. He rushed to continue providing the latest state of the situation. "The first barrier is Darong, our head fight instructor. She'll pass this one, there's no point to it. What's the next barrier?" But oh my God. The rich folk in the fighting arena were all shouting like lunatics. A second earlier, Rui Wen had sacrificed her wrist in order to dreadfully draw closer and fiercely knee Darong in the groin. Darong was a buff man with a build not inferior to crag burst at all, but the pain still made him bend over. During this time, Rui Wen smashed an elbow to his throat, pulverizing it completely and breaking bone, piercing through his artery. Darong was suffocating, and blood was spurting from his artery, causing this buff man to fall to the ground, twitching. Soon he would die. Rui Wen gazed at the dying man on the ground and spoke lightly. 70% chance of bleeding out. The contact was already stupefied just watching the scene. He couldn't take this loss. Darong was the first champion of the Underground Fighting Union. Rui Wen must be hiding her strength. What the hell is going on? Who taught her how to fight? Damn it, damn it, damn it. Jack understood the entirety of the situation from the contact's reaction. He bossed around with his hoarse voice. Raise all the defensive walls right now. Isolate the fighting stage. Tell that trash we need some time to prepare for the Beast King battle. Prepare what? You go contact Mr. Ma. Tell him that the high-quality life-or-death battle he always dreamed of has finally arrived. We'll send in the 100 victory witch Rui Wen. All he needs to do is to bring his house's darling baby over. I'll give him 10 minutes. Oh, Mr. Ma's collection, Jack, you're really too evil. The contact suddenly understood, and his admiration for Jack's quick wits increased. He hung up the phone at once and rushed to find some people. Rui Wen, forget it. Just let her go be together with her brother. Jack took off his wristband and tossed it aside. Nobody better bother me now. He was suddenly startled before his voice could fade away. He slowly raised his head, and his perfectly good right eye focused together with his robotic left eye. He gazed at the empty space devoid of all material objects in front of him. Finally found him. Luo Nan's soul body appeared in this room. He noticed Jack's reaction, but he was more surprised at Jack's current location. Jack was still inside the Dashang building, but he was on the top floor, the 141st floor. This iconic building, located in the River Wu district, had a height of approximately 600 meters. The 141st floor was at a height of over 550 meters. It just so happened to exceed the range of Luo Nan's field of senses. Luo Nan never believed that Jack would leave his old nest and enter into the Society of Access Privileges, a place that was extremely unfriendly to gangsters like him. But the facts had proven his judgment to be false. Not only did Jack enter society, he entered the top floor area of Dashang building, which requires the highest level of credit and access privileges. He even had his own training room here. Right now Jack was sitting inside a pitch-black device whose function could not be seen by Luo Nan. Several electrical leads were stuck into his body. A strong electrical current would pierce inside his body every so often. Some even tore azure, lightning through the air. Is it charging time for this altered human? Jack's pair of eyes were constantly refocusing. At the end of the space ahead of him was the wall, but ahead of a wall was something that made him be on guard. It continued to emerge. He had a special scanner installed within his body that allowed his naked and robotic eyes to receive the entire spectrum of radio waves within his surroundings. The data was calculated and processed to form an image. In the end, a blurry shadow-like figure emerged on his optic nerves. He hesitated before hoarsely speaking. An ability user in soul form. Indeed, Luo Nan was shocked. The attack with the M rifle back in the recycling stratum was really not a coincidence. This Jack seemed to have some kind of method to be able to detect the existence of soul bodies. The soul body hovered a bit within the room. Luo Nan discovered that although Jack's gaze was a bit sluggish, Jack's total energy had rapidly changed and Jack had locked onto Luo Nan's position. This was a situation that Luo Nan had never encountered. For a time, the two sides didn't do anything for fear of what may happen. Under the unspoken silence, only the crackling of electricity remained ringing through the air. Chapter 60, Altered Human, Part 2-2. In the end, it was Jack who broke the silence. He stared fixed at the empty area of space and spoke in a low voice. I don't know who you are, and I don't know which power you're affiliated with, but I am positive that there has been no animosity between us before today. I admire your ability, and I'm not willing to be your enemy. I'm willing to perform compensation if you're resentful of our conflict today. I will do my best to satisfy you with whatever you desire within the scope of my abilities. And only the crackling of electricity remained to be the response to his words. Jack paused a bit before continuing. Your soul form has yet to reach the complete level of interfering with reality. My nervous system has been altered. Your influence over me is next to nothing. Yes, there's also that large man. He's quite the headache of an opponent. Maybe he's rushing over here right now. But within the Shang building, I'll slow him down so that he's as fast as a turtle. If we can't come to an agreement, we can only keep wasting time. Maybe all the way until tomorrow morning. Luo Nan still didn't respond. He couldn't respond, even if he wanted to. Jack was right on one point. He currently had two ways to communicate with people. The first was using the psychic wave network. The second was using the local area network of the pyramid structure. Both were useless when faced with Jack. It was as if Jack's consciousness was hidden deep under a thick layer of icy water. Luo Nan could touch it, but ultimately too much of his strength would be wasted just reaching halfway through the waters. It was the same as being untouchable. Luo Nan didn't know how Jack was able to achieve this, so he simply blocked off Jack's voice and scanned the entire room to try to find out more information. What was most eye-catching in the training room was obviously the pitch-black device surrounding Jack's body. Luo Nan, with his lack of machinery knowledge, found it very hard to understand the ultimate use of this device just by looking at it. From looking at the exterior, this device just looked to be feeding large quantities of electricity into Jack's body in a steady and endless flow. Luo Nan noticed the voltage indicator. An ordinary person would have probably been turned into charcoal by now, but Jack looked to be taking it in with pleasure. He could see that the electrical currents provided by the jet-black machine were vividly entering into various positions of Jack's body. Jack's muscles were twitching and trembling every second, but a steady rhythm clearly existed within this twitching and trembling. This demonstrated that Jack maintained a certain amount of control over his body. What did he say before? He was on the stairway to heaven. Clearly, this infusion of electricity was harmless and useful for Jack. Oh, if this was the case. Jack continued to jabber on while Luo Nan was collecting information. Oh, I know, you're unable to talk right. The world's research on soul forms is extremely lacking. Or perhaps you're a gifted ability user who struck it big. Then that's excellent. I can probably guess what things will interest you the most. Intelligence, information, and all sorts of knowledge that can open up new horizons for you. For instance, I can tell you now that you can use the special frequency band of your soul form to communicate with me. This is I already have the relevant transmit and receive device implanted in my body. Even if I haven't used it for 20 to 30 years, it should still work. We can try it now. You just need to concentrate your thoughts. Since you're gifted enough to achieve soul form, this should be easy for you. The silence of the void lasted for about 5 seconds before Jack smiled. External psychic waves had gone through Jack's transmit and receive device and had converted into discernible information that sounded in his ear. I am now confident that you're not from the military. If the military possessed an altered project, they wouldn't be stuck in such a sorry situation when faced with a Darksider life form. Jack maintained his smile, making the scars on his face appear not as sinister. Of course, there is a certain difference between soul form and Darksider life forms. We can talk about this detail in the future. Indeed, you know quite a bit. Luo Nan expressed his admiration towards Jack's ability to constantly provide new information. And so I am an excellent information dealer. Jack continued to speak openly and with assurance. What shall we talk about? Oh, that's right. Let's talk about why would we become enemies. I think you will certainly be interested in that pretty boy Yan Yonbo. Now that you mention it, I think I know too much information. Luo Nan sneered. Yes. This fellow's words were buried with countless bait. He mentioned things about the world, soul form, psychic wave receive and transmit device. But in reality, the amount of practical information he divulged was practically nil. And so Luo Nan just spoke directly a second later. Let's just talk about that metal beetle then. Jack's lips split, his smile even wider. Friend, you certainly must be very young. You should know that one shouldn't get rash during conversations and try to put the other party in a predicament. Instead, we should each take what we need. I know that you're certainly much more interested in Yan Yongbo. Otherwise, you wouldn't have tailed him. Let me think what explosive points I have on him. For instance, quantum corporation, archetype format, the #1 burner in the world, or perhaps the deep blue world. You're certainly a master storyteller. Luo Nan used psychic waves to transmit his sarcasm, but he was forced to admit that all the topics mentioned by Jack had caused his interest to explode. It seemed that Luo Nan had encountered a mobile information warehouse. Jack, this fellow, was absolutely not just a simple gang leader. His experience, knowledge, and every aspect that Luo Nan was able to touch upon right now far exceeded Luo Nan's previous estimation. Anyway, just let things be this way then. Jack continued to maintain his smile, but then shock and explosive fury ripped apart this mask a short second later. The room was enveloped in darkness. Power outage. The low hum of the pitch-black machine gradually came to a halt. Its power protection mechanism was quite decent. Jack's muscles soon returned to normal after a large convulsion. But his mood didn't go back to normal. Damn you, what the hell are you up to? Jack roared in the darkness. He strived to shake his arm, but this wouldn't give him a single spark of electricity. As you can see, the power went out. Luo Nan used the method taught by Jack to maintain the conversation. It was really quite clever for Jack to choose the top floor of the Dashang building as his hiding place, for it was beyond most people's imaginations. But since this was the business district with people coming and going, there would be some uncontrollable factors. Frankly speaking, there were too many human factors. Just as before, the combination of hypnotism and the human-faced arachnid's fishing skill was far too useful. While Jack was jabbering on, Luo Nan had spent a bit of time in selecting a property manager to cut off the power to this floor. During that time, he even discovered that Jack's training room used a special dedicated power circuit. But this was still nothing to the manager of the Dashang building. The facts were proven. No matter what the functionality of this device used by Jack was, once the power was out, Jack could only become a pile of scrap. I want information. You want time. This is where the significance of our conversation lies. But what will happen if neither of us can get what we want? Before Luo Nan's eyes, Luo Nan could still see the clips of the last moments on Earth for the teenagers on the fighting stage. He didn't care if Jack couldn't see his actions. His soul body performed the same gesture of rejection as Jack, with crossed arms. If I'm rash, then so be it. I don't have an ounce of desire to talk with someone like you. Chapter 61, Secret of the Dynamo Core Part. The last remaining electrical arcs faded away in the darkness, and Jack also ceased his violent movements. He sat in the middle of the device and cast off the electrical leads one by one from his body. In the end, all that was left was his violent gasps for breath. The cutoff in power seemed to have given Jack an unexpected burden, but his robotic eye didn't lose electrical power and darken as a result. Instead, the intense rise of his mood made him glare all the more. Jack emphasized once more while gasping for breath, "You cocky bastard. Damn, do you know what you've just done? I did something that made you extremely uncomfortable, and I'm prepared to continue doing this." Luo Nan just said these words in this fashion, for this was what he was going to do. The human-faced arachnid, having just finished its mission, had already gone through the wall and returned back to his side. Under Luo Nan's direction, the human-faced arachnid threw itself onto Jack. Luo Nan was able to confirm that one of the sentences spoken by Jack was not a lie. There was a certain difference between soul bodies and Darksider life forms. Jack was clearly able to lock onto Luo Nan's soul body, but he was completely unaware of the human-faced arachnid's arrival. He was even unaware that the human-faced arachnid had already assimilated halfway into his body. But on the other hand, the human-faced arachnid couldn't find an opening in Jack. Even though Jack's emotions were erupting like crazy, Jack still maintained his soul defenses, and this was still displayed. Right now, the human-faced arachnid was a probing-type imaging device at best. Even if it figures out the brain activity of Jack to the greatest clarity, it would still be unable to interfere with him at all, and so it lacked interest. The human-faced arachnid really did have zero interest towards Jack. This wasn't because Jack was producing the lowest grade of emotions, as these were no longer in the human-faced arachnid's diet. Instead, it was because the human-faced arachnid was completely incapable of consuming Jack. This could be compared to a master painter drawing a lifelike flower, attracting the visits of bees and butterflies. But no matter what, these bees and butterflies would never be able to pluck honey from this flower. This was the difference between what was material and a picture. The difference between what was real and fake. From the human-faced arachnid's perspective, Jack's emotions were like a vivid yet fake picture. Luo Nan could see the alteration that Jack had undergone with his brain and its operations. It appeared with a conciseness and efficiency that was shocking. Any kind of stimulation would stir up the mass of neurons, causing some kind of neurotransmitter to conduct signals between neurons. Some kind of reaction would be excited to form a running and flowing line of continuous operation. At first glance, Jack's brain operation did not seem to be any different than that of ordinary people. But in reality, most emotions and mental activity of humans use complicated mechanisms of operation. Several brain regions activated in coordination in joint functionality. It was far from the ideal operation of a running and flowing line. Luo Nan sunk deeper in his investigations from this point. Then he discovered that Jack's brain operation looked to be concise and efficient, but moreover it seemed to use some sort of encoding method. The human-faced arachnid had probed exceptionally deeply. It extended its feelers to every nook and cranny of Jack's body completely, without him being aware. And so it resided in the abyss of Jack's brain, at approximately the central location connecting the left and right thalamus. It discovered that a region of an area where Jack had undergone a precision alteration. Within this area clearly lay an even tinier nucleus. Practically all of Jack's mental activity would first pass through this pre-constructed channel, go through various encodings, and exchange information with the nucleus. Then the nucleus would take the corresponding stimulation and transmit it to every nervous center before feeding back the information. It was without a doubt that this nucleus had a function of system integration. It used various encoding algorithms to form answers that were transmitted outward. This was originally a natural function of the brain, but now it was replaced by the responses of this nucleus machine. The crucial step was the distinction between what was real and what was fake. Were all altered humans like this? Luo Nan wasn't really confident in his own observations, and his thoughts of the functionality of the nucleus were more like guesses. Anyway, there was something else that firmly drew his attention. A thin thread was coiled around the body of this hidden nucleus. No, it was the metal beetle. That's right, this was none other than the metal beetle tossed out by Yan Yongbo. Luo Nan's certainty was incomparable. This was because the beetle kept half its original form at one end of the thread. This made him extrapolate that the beetle would completely fade away, given enough time, and become a thin thread. What were the conditions for the transformation? Luo Nan looked at the jet-black machine that had ceased operations and could more or less understand. This coiling thin thread gave Luo Nan a feeling of extreme familiarity. Using the human-faced arachnid as the medium, Luo Nan put his soul imaging to full use. He then discovered that there was flickering and flowing lightning on the thin thread. And as soon as he increased the precision of his senses, he confirmed that the thin thread had already sprouted with countless branches. Quite a few had already exceeded the scope of his senses. Luo Nan saw that these branches had pierced inside the nucleus, and it had permeated inside the nerves and veins. It might have even spread through the entire brain to form a tree-shaped structure with the nucleus as the core. Wasn't this the external neuron? What the hell are you up to now? It was probably due to the relentless nature of Luo Nan's probing that caused some sort of alarm installed in Jack to go off. Jack was suddenly startled with fright. The blood-red robotic eye locked onto the position of Luo Nan's soul body. Rather than Jack's exterior expression, the changes in Jack's brain were what made Luo Nan's mind truly restless. It was that thin thread. The thread had split into countless branches and had pierced into various locations of Jack's brain. In an instant, the thread vibrated to form closely woven sparks. The sparks did not appear on the plane of reality. It had a completely different effect. At this very moment, the human-faced arachnid felt a burning sensation that was strong enough to threaten its existence. It didn't need Luo Nan to command it. It just retreated outside in crazed fashion. Jack's furious mood had certainly reached the highest peak. He stood up, and at this moment, his body clearly released the glow of dark flames. The glow of flames came from the inside out, explosively ejecting the human-faced arachnid out of Jack's body. But the power didn't lessen at all when it was thrown to the location of Luo Nan's soul body. The human-faced arachnid let out a painful scream, and the powerful mental attack instantly swept across several floors of the Dashang building. It was unknown just how many people were caught in the crossfire. Luo Nan was not in a position to handle others. When the glow of flames erupted, he used all the strength of his soul to retreat through the air. The world spun as he moved, but Luo Nan's leap of distance was far below his expectations. He had only left the room. The total distance he traveled did not exceed 20 meters. When the glowing flames erupted, an incorporeal electromagnetic field was formed around Jack's body. It warped the mental plane and even the space of reality. It was as if Luo Nan's soul body fell into the bottomless abyss of the sea. Shocking pressure came at all sides of him. This feeling was far too familiar. Several days earlier on the warship, the burning wraith that was killed by Huan had suffered similar methods of being targeted, suppressed, and even annihilated. Luo Nan's thoughts trembled truly like electricity. The format of fire, burner. Chapter 61, Secret of the Dynamo Core, Part 2-2. You can't escape. Jack's hoarse voice was like the low cry of a deep-sea monster. It pierced through the wall, jolting Luo Nan's soul body in turmoil. This fellow was actually a burner. But according to Luo Nan's knowledge, burners weren't like this. Or at least, the burners of the archetype format as proposed by Yan Hong weren't like this. Otherwise, they wouldn't need some deep blue platform, some exoskeleton armor. They would just directly modify their bodies. But what Jack unleashed was clearly the power of the format of fire. The thick walls of the training room exploded with a loud rumble in the next second. The wall deformed violently as a hole was smashed open in the center. Spiderweb-like cracks spread from the hole. Jack's training room was located in the middle of the 141st floor. It was a space that was sealed by thick soundproof walls on all sides. Only one side had an opening, and Luo Nan had chosen to flee in that direction, the opposite direction of the main door. Luo Nan had done the utmost to pull his distance from Jack's pursuing attack. But what Jack chose to do was completely different than what normal people would do. From Jack's perspective, Luo Nan was far too influenced by the human train of thought. Luo Nan should have gone up or down. Having a floor in between them would allow a totally different outcome after taking on this electromagnetic interference. Luo Nan wasn't in a position to reflect on the past. He continued to try to pull his distance, but the pressure his soul body was facing was increasing without end. He could only move with great difficulty. Hell, even the burners of the military wouldn't have this sort of might without their exoskeleton armor. The wall exploded open following another attack, and Jack walked out with large strides. Both his naked eye and robotic eye locked firmly onto Luo Nan's position. The scene of the soaring flame aura had already faded away, but the effect of the magnetic field, which was like being in the deep sea, increased in intensity. Using his soul imaging technique, Luo Nan could confirm that Jack's body was deeply integrated with the deep sea M field. The circulating energy within his body increased the strength of the M field without end, and every one of his movements caused an intense change with the M field. From Luo Nan's perspective, this was a very miserable experience. Jack stared fixed in the direction of Luo Nan's soul body. He seemed to have finally controlled his rage. His hoarse and low voice sounded, "Youngster, do you know just what price I paid to obtain the Deep Sea Type 4's Dynamo Core. Do you know just how much more I have to pay for your mischievous actions? Dynamo Core. Was this the official name for the external neuron? And the model number, did it represent its corresponding abilities? Like the deep CM field radiating from Jack's body. Luo Nan unconsciously mulled over these words, and Jack didn't immediately attack him. Instead, Jack sized Luo Nan up from all angles. He looked to be a bit uncertain. Ability users nowadays are quite amazing. I actually encountered a youngster who is capable of raising a Darksider life form, and the breed seems to be quite interesting. Jack ought to be probing out right now. He had managed to injure the human-faced arachnid, but he was still unable to capture its whereabouts. Luo Nan believed that it was best to maintain his silence. His attitude made Jack sneer. Fine then. I'll enter this matter into my database and tell this story to others in the future. As for you, I don't have an ounce of desire to talk with you. The words were spoken in verbatim. Jack returned Luo Nan's words unchanged. If it was before, Luo Nan would have felt Jack's words to be sharp. But now he could not help thinking whether or not this was Jack's own free will or the computational result of an artificial intelligence. He would not receive an answer to this puzzle anytime soon. Luo Nan could deeply feel Jack's killing intent. Luo Nan no longer hesitated and amassed his concentration with full force, with only the thoughts of fleeing in mind. He had learned his lesson, and he directly fled to the floor below. The distance Luo Nan traveled was far more pitiful than last time, for he didn't even reach 4 meters. But the floor was made from concrete and highly reinforced metal. It was made of much tougher materials than the wall that Jack had exploded to pieces. Jack's attack exploded forth, and the floor caved in but didn't collapse immediately. Luo Nan took this chance to go down another floor. He managed to pull a distance of over 30 meters from Jack, and he suddenly felt the binding force of the deep CM field weaken. Luo Nan was delighted in his heart. This time the target of his escape was the empty night skies outside the Deshang building. As long as he was over there, over at that void without ground, Jack wouldn't be able to do a thing to him. Then came a muffled bang. A bullet possessing enormous kinetic force pierced through 2 floors. It deviated a bit when piercing through, but it still exploded in the vicinity of Luo Nan's soul body. Clouds of fire surged all around, causing an even greater M-field effect and disturbing Luo Nan's soul body to the greatest degree. Luo Nan had seen special ammo that was similar to this on the warship, but the results this bullet displayed were clearly superior. And this wasn't a single shot, it was automatic fire. Bullets went through the hole pierced by the first bullet and exploded one after another. Flaming clouds were everywhere in an instant, causing the flammable objects on the floor to burst into flames. The sound of thunder rang out continuously within this short time period. The structure of the 2 floors was forcefully smashed apart, and Jack just vaulted downwards. And before his body could arrive, the powerful deep CM field had already enveloped Luo Nan. Once again, it was as if Luo Nan's soul body had entered the depths of the sea. He suddenly turned sluggish, and he found it hard to move. And this time, the temperature of the seabed increased like mad. It was as if a volcano was going off in the middle of the ocean, and it was about to cook Luo Nan completely. Luo Nan suddenly felt a feeling of helplessness being trapped within. Then out of nowhere, he gradually understood. His soul body wasn't harmed that much by Jack's format of fire or the deep CM field. Instead, it was his external fuel tank, the human-faced arachnid, that had suffered heavy damage from the first attack. It was impossible for it to recover. Luo Nan had yet to achieve a true out-of-body state. He couldn't rely on his soul body to do whatever he pleased. He relied heavily on the energy provided by the human-faced arachnid. Jack's explosive format of fire had inadvertently struck Luo Nan's lifeline. This was bad, and at this time, Jack's large actions of destroying walls and causing fires finally led to the activation of the defensive systems of the Dashang building. Right now, there were just two people here on this floor. The floor was the office area of some large business. Right now it was night time and it was the weekend, so there was not a soul in sight. The automatic robotic guard system of the property was the first to respond. When the fire alarm and theft alarm went off at the same time, the entrance to the office area exploded open. The blood-red light of the alarm cut through the area, and civilian defense robots entered the room. They aimed their anti-riot guns towards the only target they could see, Jack. The problem was that the robots received a completely new order before they could attack with their anti-riot guns, causing the robots to enter a cute and idle state. Then all fire and theft alarms ceased, and the building was back to being quiet again. Only the office materials continued to burn and combust within the room. Jack didn't even turn around during the entire course of events. He remained staring dead-fixed at the location of Luo Nan's soul body. Chapter 62, Superiority Part. Luo Nan had witnessed Jack control the entire situation from beginning to end. It was as if this fellow Jack was holding a remote control that could pause and play. With just the press of a button, the security system of the entire floor, no, the entire building, froze. This scene wasn't caused by the effects of possessing high access privileges in the Dashang building, for the robots didn't have any means of detecting privileges. Yet the robots had just given in. They completely lacked the strength to resist. This made Luo Nan recall the pitiful tiger burst, Jeep of Crag burst. Luo Nan broke his silence at last by using psychic waves to talk. How did you do that? Oh, now you want to talk, spoke Jack in irony and ridicule. Why are you making a huge fuss over nothing? I can control. Oh, there's the Darksider life form. I can control machines. It's very fair. Jack didn't refuse to talk, yet he didn't directly answer Luo Nan. He didn't mind responding to Luo Nan a bit more. After all, he felt some brooding in his mind from not being able to trace down the Darksider life form. He needed time to adjust the relevant parameters in his database. He was constantly amending the scope of his detection. Luo Nan could guess approximately what Jack was up to. Most of Jack's means of detection required the use of that robotic eye. After all, Jack was even turning his head about without end. This was good news. It seemed like Jack was very fearful of Darksider life forms. Or perhaps Jack still felt that Luo Nan was still a threat. Luo Nan secretly paid this in mind. But now, he couldn't help have the majority of his thoughts turn to the direction of machine control. This was because Jack, as well as the previous actions of Yan Yongbo, had made his mind associate to a different yet similar case. The underground laboratory in Gear. More specifically, the external neuron. Luo Nan was able to confirm that the thin thread in Jack's brain was really the external neuron, or as Jack called it, the Dynamo Core. This creation, which seemed to exceed the technology of this planet, could transcend all access privileges and directly control and manipulate all information technology at will. And now new facts told him that this toy was the key to being a burner, to the format of fire, in addition to the above functions. Such a marvelous creation had actually accompanied him for a period of 5 years in silence, and it was mailed into his hands from that coward. What did this mean? What did this prove? The Gale-like pursuit and escape had made it hard for Luo Nan to devote part of his mind and ponder over this matter. Now that there was a bit of time, relevant thoughts came drilling into the pit of his sternum like a heart-devouring bug. External neuron, Dynamo Core, burner, gang leader, Yan Yongbo, Quantum Corporation, and that coward. The sudden trail of thoughts, the explosion of information, seemed to tie itself into a noose on Luo Nan's mind. If this knot doesn't loosen, then Luo Nan's soul would become asphyxiated. Luo Nan suddenly felt regret. Maybe he should have let Jack tell a few more stories. He wanted to get things clear by any means necessary. He wanted to know just what sort of relationship existed between Jack the gang leader and that coward. Luo Nan needed to strive towards this target right now. He did his best to maintain a clear head and used the flattest psychic waves as possible to convey information and probe Jack's response. Machine control at will, you don't have this ability. Otherwise, you wouldn't have gone to the recycling stratum and become a gang leader. You would have run away to the outside and stirred up troubles with your power. Jack laughed a hoarse and deep laugh. Are you trying to provoke me? Kid, you were already successful before, you don't need to worry about how you're going to die. I admit that you have the ability to kill me. You're a burner now after all. What's wrong? Was I mistaken? Luo Nan saw Jack's lips split into a grin that was filled with mockery. Jack shrugged his shoulders. It's nothing. People do have the right to be ignorant, and I don't have the obligation to correct others. Kid, there's no need to keep testing the waters. Call upon your pet. I'll give you an even more painful way to die. Luo Nan would only do what Jack said if he went retarded, but Jack's mocking smile and words did contain quite a bit of meaning. Jack was feeling a sense of superiority. He felt high and mighty. The word people did not necessarily refer specifically to Luo Nan. Instead, it was an unrestrained orbital assault that was filled with the implication that Jack was the sole sober person in a world of drunks. Note that Jack's thought process contained a high level of mental activity. It all stemmed from the data frame that was the nucleus in Jack's brain. In a certain sense, it came to be more realistic than that of any ordinary person. Then, where did Jack's sense of superiority come from? Luo Nan sized up Jack once more. He had obtained some intelligence from the gang members. This ruthless and vicious fellow had become the gang leader of this area in just 2–3 years' time. He started off as a fighting instructor and rapidly became an important character in the fighting arena through the bloody 70% elimination law. Then he became the referee, the ace host, a partner, and finally he became into the head spokesperson of the organized fighting arena. He had overflowing capabilities that allowed him to become a gang leader. But this wasn't representative of the fact that he was like this in other fields. Then, it's the metal beetle, right? Like a sudden thrusting peak, Luo Nan got straight to the point with this question. Jack was a bit startled, but then he quickly smiled. Do you still want to act rashly, youngster? Luo Nan ignored Jack's attempt at disturbing him. His thoughts were calm and certain. Everything that had happened in Jack's body had been laid bare by the prying of the human-faced arachnid. Yan Yongbo used it to control our jeep. When you came over to settle things later, you were clearly more interested in the metal beetle itself. Oh, it's too amateurish of me to call it the metal beetle. You called it the Dynamo Core, right? Deep Sea Type 4's Dynamo Core. It's a miraculous device that allows an ordinary altered human to possess abilities similar to that of Berners. Jack went quiet in an instant. The dark red robotic eye, which had been searching for the human-faced arachnid, swiveled back over. It stared at the fuzzy figure of Luo Nan's soul body. Are you trying to show off your intelligence? But we don't recruit newcomers over here. When Jack had opened his mouth, the deep CM field's intensity continued to increase. The feeling of his soul body turned even worse. From Luo Nan's perspective, breaking away from Jack's suppression and fleeing far, far away was what he should do the most. But then psychic aura came gushing out from his mind. The aura interweaved to form a train of thought. It joined and assembled under the external pressure to drive forward with layer upon layer. Luo Nan was unwilling to interrupt this process. The Dynamo Core is very valuable to you, so Yan Yongbo paid you it as an award. But from the model number, I can see that this should be part of a series that's already in production. At the very least, it's a trial series that possesses a manufactured ability, and it is closely related to Berners. Only Quantum Corporation has the power to be related to it. Luo Nan's mental faculties were processing without end, reaching the greatest peak of his 15 years of life. He didn't speak directly to Jack. Instead, he was releasing bits and bits of bait within his words. At the same time, he was observing all of Jack's reactions and constantly amending his own inference. Of course, there's also you. You're an altered human, yet you're not from the military. The number of people in the world that can adapt to the ability of Berners can be counted on one hand. So I am confident that you come from Quantum Corporation. You've been working for this company that's at the world's leading and cutting edge of technology. After transmitting the psychic waves, Luo Nan saw Jack's face expose a mocking smile of superiority. Chapter 62, Superiority Part 2-2. Luo Nan could practically hear the heartbeat of his main body when he saw Jack's expression. The company that's at the world's leading and cutting edge of technology was an embellishment that Luo Nan had intentionally added in order to probe out the relationship between Jack and Quantum Corporation. He had predicted several responses from Jack, but the sole response he didn't think of was the smile that floated on Jack's face. His lips had split into a perfect curve. Luo Nan was forced to admit that he had to reevaluate the relationship between Jack and Quantum Corporation. But he had to make one thing clear before doing this. For what reason? For what reason would a gang leader, stowed away in the recycling stratum, have this sort of attitude towards a major power rated to be top 3 in market value in the entire world? Luo Nan thought things over using the simplest train of logic. Could it be that Jack was backed by this colossus? At least to his knowledge, Jack even had eyes of contempt towards Quantum Corporation, the company that's at the world's leading edge of technology. Luo Nan thought once more of the bait buried within Jack's words. Something about soul configuration, deep blue world. He had never heard of these words before. Now that he thought about it, it's highly likely that these were deeply hidden secrets that could shock the entire world. Was that coward related to these things? How deeply was he related? Thoughts spun in his mind, but time did not allow Luo Nan further consideration. He could only continue his previous train of thought. He made a minor amendment and went to probe Jack's background. You both work at Quantum Corporation, yet Yan Yongbo can wield the power of the Rainbow Fund. You, however, can only mix with a bunch of gangsters. Yan Yongbo just casually tossed out a Dynamo Core, and this was enough to make you strive for it with all your might. It hasn't been long since Yan Yongbo joined Quantum Corporation, as far as I know. His rapid rise to a high position, is it due to his own strength or to his father's? Or perhaps being an altered human that needs to draw on the Dynamo Core to possess the power of burners, makes you bound to be a defective product off the assembly line. The hell are you being extra clever for? The low and hoarse roar was accompanied by a buzzing. The deep sea field's pressure and temperature rapidly increased, and Luo Nan's soul body was forcefully compressed under the sudden increase in pressure. Clearly, Luo Nan's words had struck a sore spot of Jack's. Jack's smile completely faded away from his face. He reached out his hand and pressed down lightly on his forehead, seemingly to conceal his momentary loss of control. But his robotic eye, which was about to ignite, still exposed his current mood. His anger was at the highest level. Right now Luo Nan found it hard to even transmit psychic waves, but he knew that if he were to give up now, Jack would probably eliminate him on the spot. Luo Nan understood this matter very clearly. He still needed a bit more time. It was just a slip of the tongue. I'm really sorry. I just spoke what I had guessed. Some of my words might have been very stupid, but I think our current situation is far more stupid. True, the speaker is quite stupid, and the listener also isn't intelligent. Jack took 2 deep breaths. Last time he reacted like this was when the power outage happened. But this time his breathing was effective. His mood had recovered to normal, and he even mocked himself. This sort of control ability, which was like switching modes, seemed to be only possessed by altered humans. Luo Nan noticed Jack's self-control. According to reason, this callous altered human had many opportunities to unleash the explosive power of the format of fire and annihilate Luo Nan's soul body into ashes. But aside from the very first attack, Jack did not really make another move. When faced with the hot-headed and straightforward opponent in front of him, the current Jack was rather overly cautious. This had no relation with being intelligent or stupid. Luo Nan could only think things over on the more realistic side of things. Was it due to the fear of Darksider life forms, or was there a more direct, more fatal reason? Obviously, Jack wouldn't reveal the answer. Then Jack made a substantial action. He walked forward, drawing closer the distance between him and Luo Nan's soul body. The pressure of the field was increased by 10-fold when the distance was reduced. Luo Nan tried to retreat backward, but this yielded minimal results. Jack revealed a smile anew. When I was in the deep blue world, I heard that one could use the powerful field formed by the Dynamo Core to confine and capture souls and even Darksider life forms. Now I can test it out. Deep blue world. Luo Nan's first thought was this information that came from far, far away. He only really understood in the next moment. So Jack actually wanted to capture him alive. Yes. From the increasing pressure of the field, Luo Nan could see that this was truly Jack's plan. Luo Nan's soul body had already shrunk 2 times from its initial size. If this were to continue, he would become like the legendary Isun Boshi, the 1-inch samurai, and be pinched between Jack's fingers. Luo Nan couldn't spare further thoughts on other matters. He amassed his concentration with full force, wishing to make his soul body move again. But at this time, the only parts of his entire body that could move were the dark chains that had been moving without end all this time. The chains. Before Luo Nan's thought became clear, the dark chains suddenly increased in vibration. But this wasn't a force that was born from the inside. It was an attack that came from the outside. A sharp hiss rang out, and a shadow leaped out from several floors below, colliding with force into the deep CM field. The sudden impact on the mental plane actually caused the M field's operation to suddenly lag. The shadow collided with Luo Nan's soul body in the next instant. Like riding a flying nimbus, Luo Nan flew backward and broke free from the controlling range of the deep CM field. The human-faced Arachnid. This malevolent demon came slaughtering outright when Luo Nan needed it the most. The turbid flowing emotions still rose from its body as vapor. The heavy damage inflicted by the format of fire could not be seen right now, at least from the exterior. Success. Luo Nan's mind relaxed, and he flipped over to stand on the back of the human-faced Arachnid. He controlled this demon, which had just refilled its essence, to fly towards the nearest wall and out of the building. Luo Nan didn't look back at all. Jack's heavy and swift footsteps rang out from behind. Jack was still chasing Luo Nan, and his speed was rapidly increasing. This large office area gave him ample space to accelerate. The deep CM field came with Jack's pursuit, appearing as a shadow behind Luo Nan and the human-faced Arachnid. It was like a silent, evil beast that had locked onto its prey with the desire to hastily consume. But it was useless in the end. Several tens of meters was a far too short of a distance for a soul body. With just a moment's breath, Luo Nan and the human-faced Arachnid had already left the outer wall of the building to enter the interweaving neon lights of the night sky. Then, after another instant, they were already flying a kilometer high in the air. Jack rushed to the end of the floor and heavy smashed against the window, his strength not fading away at all. The powerful and tough reinforced glass exploded with web-like cracks in an instant, but it didn't break in the end. However, the metal frame supporting all sides of the window couldn't hold on. The entire window ripped off from the wall due to Jack's collision, and the window fell towards the ground. Jack borrowed the loss of his momentum to stand at the brink of the empty floor. He took out a thick-barreled gun from his back, the same gun he used to fire the special military ammunition down to this floor. The muzzle aimed at the night sky, but in the end, Jack didn't pull the trigger in futility. He just coldly stared at the shadow of the night sky's void. A long time passed before he turned around and left. Chapter 63, Demon Altar Part. Leave, you didn't think things would be that easy, did you? Luo Nan stood above in the night sky. He looked through the crisscrossing light rails of traffic lanes that surrounded the Dashang building and saw Jack leave in hatred. Luo Nan let out a long breath of relief and then burst into laughter. Right now, a very interesting relationship existed between Luo Nan and Jack. Jack's deep CM field had inflicted heavy damage and even neutralized Luo Nan's abilities, but its effective range was still limited. Luo Nan himself didn't have any methods that were threats to Jack, but he had his long-distance sensing range of 500 meters in radius. And so it was destined. Luo Nan had completely pulled away from Jack, and it was impossible for Jack to escape from Luo Nan's focus. Luo Nan was in quite the sorry state back in the deep CM field. Today, Jack's action had caused him to be quite hard-pressed, so Luo Nan had to expose every single action of Jack's to his sole observation. Luo Nan lightly patted the human-faced Arachnid, indicating to it to catch up with Jack. The human-faced Arachnid suddenly flew into action. They dropped down rapidly in the night sky and entered the Dashang building once more. They went through the wall like a ghost, and the turbid flow of vapor that lingered on the human-faced Arachnid's body made it look bizarre and demonic. Luo Nan's mental senses locked firmly onto Jack, who was over 20 stories away. 100 meters of distance meant that the precision of his senses was a centimeter long. The several tens of floors provided him with both safety and care. He would totally have the time to respond to anything that might happen. Jack had to have sensed that Luo Nan was locked onto him and was surveilling him, for he kept looking back while he walked. Each time he looked back, he locked onto the direction of Luo Nan's soul body. But so what? He couldn't do a thing to Luo Nan. Things went far too easily for Luo Nan. He attentively watched Jack's whereabouts while combing through the human-faced arachnid state. Luo Nan's soul body was standing on the back of the human-faced arachnid right now. The sensation he felt on the mental plane was really quite bizarre. Although the nervous system could reconstruct the sensations from previous experiences to a great degree, there were bound to be some sensations that were untranslatable and could only be intuitively grasped. The contact between Luo Nan and the human-faced arachnid was like standing on a barbed wad of cloud and mist. Below him was incorporeal and formless, but there were the amazing forces of internal pressure and outward tension that acted simultaneously, holding a sense of physicality on the mental plane. The so-called pressure and tension were just crude feelings. Deeply concealed inside was actually the foundational structure to the existence of the human-faced arachnid. The current precision of Luo Nan's senses wasn't enough to peek at the marvels inside the human-faced arachnid, but he could basically feel some slack in the foundational structure of the human-faced arachnid. The human-faced arachnid was hit head-on with the explosion of the format of fire from Jack. Indeed, it had suffered heavy damage. More than half of the demonic body had been melted away. Not even half of its volume remained. But this sort of heavy damage wasn't fatal for the human-faced arachnid. It could probably consume some spiritual seeds or something similar to quickly recover or even evolve. But Luo Nan absolutely refused to use this sort of evil method. At the very least, the human-faced arachnid couldn't have found other human-faced arachnid clones in such a short time. Even if it did find them, it wasn't a guarantee that it could consume them. And so, Luo Nan could only select the stupidest option for the human-faced arachnid. Go drink from the turbid flow of emotions then. Drink until you're full. It didn't matter if the human-faced arachnid was willing or not. This was the only method that would allow the human-faced arachnid to quickly recover in this situation. Luckily, the underground fighting arena of Deshang Building was a reservoir of dirty negative emotions. Luo Nan gave the human-faced arachnid an absolute order. Go down there and feed, but avoid Rui Wen and Crag Burst. In a certain sense, Luo Nan's conversation with Jack was also to buy time for the human-faced arachnid. Now Luo Nan's plan was considered a success. The human-faced arachnid had recovered part of its strength and had saved him from a most perilous situation. But on the other hand, to force the human-faced arachnid to drink dirty water meant that the situation was very serious. Though the human-faced arachnid had been heavily damaged by the format of fire, its foundation was still relatively solid. It was just weak from excessive wear and tear. But right now, its foundation was a bit unstable, even though this fellow looked to be quite vibrant in power. It had fallen over a factor in power from its peak, and it wouldn't be easy for it to recover all the way back. From this, Luo Nan now knew that the quality of food was extremely important for the human-faced arachnid. It would only eat grass if it was completely necessary, and this would not be filling at all. Switching to a different topic, were the people back in the fighting arena still alive? Just as this thought flashed in his mind, Cragburst's voice came transmitting over. Hello, 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 hello. Scout, did you lose connection? Not at all. From beginning to end, Luo Nan didn't let Cragburst know that he had sought out Jack on his own. Part of it was because he didn't want to reveal the existence of his soul body. The other part was because he felt that Rui Wen needed Cragburst to keep an eye over her more than him. He had thought things over from all sides, but he never expected that he would get caught in such a perilous situation. According to reason, the conversation between the two should have gone easy and unhindered thanks to the Hexuia. Luo Nan and Cragburst had been talking quite a bit before Luo Nan faced off with Jack. But then Cragburst remained quiet for the following moments. Now that Luo Nan thought about it, this was very strange. Luo Nan made a mental association to the perilous situation and wondered. Perhaps Jack's deep CM field had an interference effect. I saw that your crow went smack silent all of a sudden. I thought you reached your time limit for possession. Nope, wait a bit. Luo Nan steered the human-faced arachnid to arrive in one of the middle floors of the Dashang building for a large vantage point. Here he could completely unleash the dominance of his sensing range, covering the entirety of the Dashang building. The circumstances at the underground fighting arena entered Luo Nan's control in this instant. But to simultaneously observe two places at once was quite the challenge in terms of energy and precision. The situation at the underground fighting arena was somewhat beyond Luo Nan's expectations. Mr. Ma's precious little baby had yet to be transporting over there. Rui Wen just stood on stage by herself in solitary, but the several hundred rich guests were actually glowing red all across their faces. There were ample energy and even additional excitement. They were chatting, provoking, and endlessly cursing loudly about their bets to their opponents. Or perhaps they were shamelessly teasing the beautiful female and handsome male prostitutes of the underground fighting arena. Some even performed on the spot in full view of the crowd, engaging in these absurd actions. Of course, this could be considered a part of gambling. Were they really raided by the human-faced arachnid? They all went crazy. As an ability user, Cragburst had experienced many years of adventures and had seen several absurd and degenerate scenes. But the current scene was still something that could be counted on one hand. This is simply the hedonistic ritual of some secret order. They're using every method possible to try to please the devil. Hello. Is there really an order behind them, like I said? I don't know. As Luo Nan spoke, he was reminded by Cragburst to spare a bit of energy towards the display of debauchery by the rich guests. Oh, this type of emotion, what large fervor one. Luo Nan suddenly understood. The human-faced arachnid, having received a moment of independence, had used methods that far exceeded his crude expectations in intricacy. Fervor Chinese letter, literally void fire. Chinese letter, in this case, refers to excessive yang energy due to lack of yin energy, presumably due to the human-faced arachnid consuming negative emotions. This term is not used in any of the future chapters. I thought it would be pretty interesting to point out. Chapter 63, Demon Altar Part 2-2. The human-faced arachnid was like a top-notch looter and arsonist. Luo Nan was certain that the human-faced arachnid had swept this place clean. It wouldn't be excessive to say that it had wrung every ounce of blood and essence from them. But through it all, the human-faced arachnid had displayed outstanding skill in stealing. It had consumed until it was filled with negative emotions and the corresponding life force energy. It had siphoned most of these people down to their base emotions, leaving just some grass on the surface of the ground. Then it had lit a fire in delight. The loss of control over negative emotions was tinder for the fire. The life force energy floating in the air was what lit the fire. There were many cases like this in reality. The weaker one's body gets, the more one can't control their desires. And when one loses control, the last bit of life force in their body gets squeezed clean. Right now at the spectator stands, all the rich guests, their private secretaries and mistresses, and the great quantity of staff members of the fighting arena were ignorantly caught in this situation. As soon as Luo Nan realized what the problem was, the circumstances of the fighting arena turned completely differently in his eyes. This was no fighting arena, this was a brazier that would soon burn dry and break. Or perhaps it was the caverns of a deep mine that was filled with gas, one that had already been lit aflame. The large quantity of negative emotions and evanescent life force, energy formed a burning massive cloud that could not be seen by the naked eye. It pervaded everywhere on the mental plane. If these people could sense their own soul, they would discover that a terrifying feeling of suffocation had already descended upon them. And so Crag burst and awakened, could sense the intense feeling of incongruity from within. He wanted to eliminate this feeling that was born from the current situation. How was this situation created? Luo Nan was disinclined to think further about the last moments of these rich guests at the spectator stands. Instead, he was rather interested in the human-faced arachnid's actions. In any case, Jack wasn't making any particular movements at the moment. So Luo Nan just patted the human-faced arachnid beneath him and indicated to this fellow to give him a demonstration. Obviously, the human-faced arachnid wouldn't decline. It charged back into the fighting arena a few instances later. It buried its devilish body deep within the flaming cloud. Its 6 demonic eyes were half open and half closed, and it opened its sinister mouth wide. It sucked the flaming cloud inside and spat out the unstable turbid vapor of emotions out, forming an exchange of stability. Luo Nan understood completely now. The human-faced arachnid couldn't disobey the conditions of his order, so it had created this killer poison environment. It did the utmost to dispel the components of the turbid flow of emotions that it disliked the most. Luo Nan didn't know how much of an improvement the entire process yielded, but it was fine as long as the human-faced arachnid was happy. In essence, the fighting arena was no longer a location that provided the rich guests with stimulation and wanton amusement they desired. Instead, it was an enormous altar. They believed themselves to be rulers, but now they had turned into livestock that were placed upon the altar. They would be slaughtered anytime the human-faced arachnid demanded it. Even though this didn't conform with Luo Nan's aesthetics, Luo Nan didn't feel a need to amend things. He swept a glance towards Jack. That fellow had slowed down his pace. Seemed like he was muttering something to himself. Luo Nan didn't need the human-faced arachnid to be beside him in order to tail Jack. The previous battle proved that it would be easier to adapt to new situations if Luo Nan and the human-faced arachnid were separated. So Luo Nan let the human-faced arachnid stay behind in the fighting arena. It would be good for the human-faced arachnid to stabilize its foundation a bit. But then, an unforeseen event occurred within the 10 seconds after making the decision. Rui Wen, who had been standing with dangling hands all this time on the stage, suddenly raised her head. Her gaze faced the empty sky above her head. There was a broadcast display over there. It was displaying her image. Several people noticed this change. Soon, they gave rational explanations for the cause. Oh. The flat-chested witch has started to become depressed. Is she trying to see what she looks like in her last moments? Look, there won't be a chance in the future. A disturbance, which was not too big yet not too small, arose in the fighting arena. The spectators became excited. Their debased mockery mixed with their uninhibited emotions and was cast on stage. Rui Wen didn't react at all towards their provocation. She just looked upwards in a daze. Was she really looking at herself on the display? It wasn't so. Though it appeared that Rui Wen's gaze was towards the broadcast display, Luo Nan was certain that her true focus was on something else, the human-faced arachnid. Because in the next instant, the human-faced arachnid's devilish eyes had suddenly opened wide and looked towards Rui Wen's location. It had been floating idly within the flaming clouds when it suddenly increased in tension. The burning negative emotions and life force, energy curled around its body to form rings and rings of indistinct fire. And Luo Nan's order came into effect at this time. Luo Nan was worried that the human-faced arachnid would really swallow Rui Wen's spiritual seed. It had been drooling over her for a long time. Luo Nan wanted it to restrain itself and relocate. The human-faced arachnid abided by the order, but then Rui Wen's gaze shifted along as well. She did not deviate from it at all. Cragburst discovered that something was wrong at this time. Hey, what's she looking at? I don't know. As Luo Nan replied in this manner, his entire scalp went numb on his main body. If had he perceived the situation correctly, then it was as if Rui Wen could see the human-faced arachnid. Could she actually see Darksider life forms? Was Rui Wen an ability user? But why weren't there any signs of it before? Or maybe her ability had just awakened from the stimulation given by the human-faced arachnid. A series of questions popped out in his mind, but not an answer was obtained to a single one. The human-faced arachnid then howled as a response to Luo Nan's order. This was originally a sound that only Luo Nan could hear, but now Rui Wen, this desolate and silent girl, raised her head from atop the stage. She gazed towards the skies above the fighting arena. If her line of sight was extended about 300 meters, then her gaze would meet Luo Nan. Abnormals. Although Luo Nan clearly knew that Rui Wen couldn't possibly see him, he still ate some shock, and he couldn't help shifting his position. He was just about to ponder over the circumstances of this girl, but he never expected that things would come his way and be so overwhelming. And at this time, Jack ended his own self-contemplation. He increased his speed all of a sudden and returned back to his training room in a short 30 seconds. He picked up his previously discarded wristband and seemed to be making an external call. Luo Nan had to concentrate all his energy towards Jack, but before doing so, he had given an order to the human-faced arachnid to keep its distance from Rui Wen. Don't attract the girl's attention. Luo Nan began to close in on Jack after arranging everything. He hoped to increase the precision of his senses. But this was different than the time when Jack was communicating with the contact of the fighting arena. Luo Nan couldn't possibly stick close to Jack in the same manner unless he wanted to forfeit his life. So the precision wasn't guaranteed. Ultimately, Luo Nan took the risk to pull within 50 meters of distance to Jack. He could feel the radio waves emitting from the wristband, but he could only track a small section of distance. He had to give up. Jack's call time was extremely short, and the direction of transmission was clearly towards the outside of the Shang building. The distance was far, far exceeding the limit of Luo Nan's senses. Maybe he was making contact with Yan Yongbo. Luo Nan could only make a blind guess. Then Jack entered the changing stall in the training room and changed his clothes. A white dress shirt, a black bow tie and black slacks, the official clothing for a fighting referee. Then Jack shot a cold and hard glance towards Luo Nan's position, directly went out, and entered a high-speed elevator. Was he going to the fighting arena? Jack's gaze was clearly a provocation. It was very evident that part of the fighting arena's situation had been revealed to Jack. The possibility of the cause being the human-faced arachnid was very small. Then that means... Crag burst, Jack's here. Who, where? Crag burst was stupefied for a moment, but understood quickly. He immediately asked Luo Nan for confirmation. Luo Nan didn't respond immediately, for the human-faced arachnid had disobeyed his order. During the moment, his attention was split. It swept along the flaming cloud of burning negative emotions and leaped over towards Rui Wen. Chapter 64, Live Sacrifice Part. The human-faced arachnid was revolting. Luo Nan was suddenly furious, and the dark chains shook to forcefully rein back in the human-faced arachnid. The chains hummed with its vibrating cry, and the flaming clouds that surrounded the human-faced arachnid collapsed and dispersed. The arachnid hissed and screeched. It was clearly suffering. Luo Nan's anger slightly dampened from the miserable reaction of the human-faced arachnid. It seemed that his control over the arachnid was still effective. He then thought of how this fellow had just saved his life, and his heart softened a bit. Besides, what was the point of getting mad at this unintelligent fellow that only relied on its instinct for its behavior? Luo Nan was baffled. The human-faced arachnid had always listened to him ever since the dark chains had shackled it, and the arachnid didn't overstep its actions with Rui Wen before. Why did it suddenly go out of control? Luo Nan needed to think this question over very carefully. Jack rode the high-speed elevator, walked through a dedicated passageway, and reached the fighting arena at this time. But he didn't directly show himself in public. Instead, he entered the VIP box and met with the contact. They didn't speak of anything important during this time, so Luo Nan concentrated his energy to think over the issue with the human-faced arachnid. Communicating with the unintelligent human-faced arachnid could be said to be an extremely strenuous undertaking. It couldn't directly tell Luo Nan what it was thinking, so Luo Nan could only search for connections to the problem within the arachnid's chaotic mess of data all by himself. His current analysis of the human-faced arachnid, according to the flexible e-ink screen, was only at 2%. In other words, 98% of the arachnid's data was just mumbo-jumbo. To find things that could be understood from this mumbo-jumbo, and useful things at that, was truly... Hey, what's this? Luo Nan's soul body rippled slightly. He was startled by a moving image that suddenly shone into his eyes. The video was some external data that the human-faced arachnid had absorbed beforehand. Frankly speaking, Luo Nan was just shocked for a moment before he rapidly came to a conclusion. This was a whole-body image of the structure of a human body, with several machine components mixed inside. This specimen was none other than Jack. Luo Nan probed into the mysteries of Jack's body with the help of the human-faced arachnid, concentrating most of his energy into Jack's brain activity and just casually glancing over the other parts. But Luo Nan never expected that the arachnid would actually record Jack's entire body and use methods incomprehensible to Luo Nan to form an integrated video. A scene as if shot from a movie was displayed in front of Luo Nan's eyes. The time frame of the scene was set when the arachnid had appeared. This was when Jack unleashed his format of fire right before the arachnid was completely exploded away. And so Luo Nan could see a myriad of thin threads splitting from the Dynamo Core and penetrating through veins and nerves. The threads extended through Jack's entire body, unfurling open to form a complicated yet complete infrastructure in an instant. Every source of energy in Jack's body, be it flesh or machine, were all integrated into this infrastructure and were being transformed. In the next moment, Jack was like the embodiment of a super control chip of a precision device. The location, the specific timing, and the amount of force to exert were all coordinated flawlessly. It was because of this that the internal forces from the high-speed integration didn't damage his body in the first moments. Instead, he stayed on the dangerous border where the closely woven fiery electrical power was successfully transporting back to the location of the nucleus and the Dynamo Core. The Dynamo Core lit up under the convergence of high energy. The lightning, which had been flickering unstably on the mental plane, turned lustrous and dazzling. The energy in Jack's body completed with an inconceivable change in nature at this very moment. In other words, the energy had crossed over from the plane of reality to a different dimension. It had entered the mental domain. Ignition successful, nice. Luo Nan's soul body suddenly spun a circle in the air to calm down his excited mood. He didn't know what was the difference between this ignition method and that of the typical burner, but this was still the first time he saw the entire ignition process of the format of fire. Even if the true core procedure wasn't revealed, the Dynamo Core should be the key step in completing the energy transformation process. But this was fine. Having this piece of concept and reasoning was already priceless. It didn't matter if it was Quantum Corporation or some other colossal power. The line of research behind their burners were all laid bare to Luo Nan. Luo Nan thought about how Quantum Corporation had spent 10 painstaking years and trillions of credits in investments to have this project become a success, and Luo Nan felt the deep pleasure of revenge. The problem was, his revenge wasn't over. Beyond all expectations, the movie clip, which was highly integrated by the Human-Faced Arachnid, continued to play on. The following scene was much blurrier. Then the time returned back to the Dynamo Core and the myriad of thin threads splitting off of it, the moment when the infrastructure was established. The image of Jack's body became ghostly. Large pieces of area were erased. All that was left were the Dynamo Core, veins, neurons, and parts of the body used to establish the framework. Energy just channeled, amassed, and ignited through this framework. Luo Nan could see that the scene was replaying the course of events with the ignition from before. The replay demonstrated the importance of the infrastructure itself. Irrelevant branches and knots were erased from it, and the marvels of the ignition process were carried out once more. Luo Nan recalled the self-format. Wasn't the current stage of his body's infrastructure similar to this in nature? What an exquisite reference. Perhaps he could use this method as a reference for future training. Luo Nan let out a breath of deep emotion and admiration, his head burning. He continued to play the movie clip and began watching the replay playback a second time. The clip started over from the beginning yet again. But this time, the complicated infrastructure established by Dynamo Core turned into a fuzzy backdrop. Only concise lines, straight and curved, remained. They connected to key nodes of the infrastructure. Maybe they were randomly created. Or maybe they were magnetic field lines. Luo Nan was forced to admit that he had no idea what he was looking at. But then, when those straight lines and arcs completed joining, they formed a complete and closed-off figure in the middle. When the figure finally emerged before Luo Nan's eyes, Luo Nan felt a certain trembling sensation that came rising from the bottom of his heart. It dominated him entirely. It was a palpitation that was felt when gorgeous light could be seen from being down in the darkness of the abyss. A tetrahedron was a bit imperfect. An inscribed sphere wasn't completely tangent to the four sides. An outer scribed sphere didn't perfectly touch the four corners of the tetrahedron. But this structure, its silhouette, and the marvelous idea that emerged from it were like a heavy fist that exploded against Luo Nan's heart. It blasted his chaotic state of mind into pieces, leaving behind only a diagram that had long since been assimilated into his mind and thoroughly branded into the depths of his soul. The tetrahedron and its inscribed and outer-scribed spheres. The figure analyzed by the human-faced arachnid marvelously intertwined and linked up with Luo Nan's visualization diagram right at this moment. Only what pertained to formatting theory persisted in a completely pounding and igniting manner. Luo Nan froze on the spot. He forgot to restrain the human-faced arachnid, giving the arachnid some freedom. It just followed its simple-minded nature and hissed sharply before leaping over to Rui Wen on the fighting stage. Luo Nan had already reacted midway through this, but he didn't try stopping the human-faced arachnid, for he could see a completely different scene. The human-faced arachnid wasn't going to eat Rui Wen. Its attack was more like a connecting line. It stirred the flaming clouds of turbid emotions as it approached Rui Wen. Right when Rui Wen was about to be drowned within, the lustrous and pure spiritual seed emitted bright rays of splendor like a star penetrating through the clouds. Rui Wen and the human-faced arachnid jolted simultaneously. Then the arachnid started to fly in an orbit around Rui Wen. Rui Wen's gaze followed the arachnid for half a circle before she slowly closed her eyes right when she was about to turn her body. This scene emerged within Luo Nan's eyes. A circle was slowly forming. Chapter 64, Live Sacrifice, Part 2-2. The circular state is still too abstract. It needs to be more concrete. Luo Nan stared dead-fixed at the fighting stage. He looked at the state of the special connecting line between the human-faced arachnid and Rui Wen. And at the same time, the people in the audience were also looking from the spectator stands, but all they saw was Rui Wen closing her eyes. They jeered, mocked, scolded from the spectator stands in response, using as much obscenities as possible to release the pressure and emotions from their everyday lives. They let their feelings of superiority and success from being dictators over life and death fly out. But essentially, they were a herd of the blind. They were stupid hogs and lamb that had been placed on the sacrificial altar and were still shouting in delight. They didn't know that their life force energy was burning with every obscenity that leaves their mouths, every time they release their negative emotions. The energy was cast into this confined fighting arena and transformed into parts of the flaming cloud to ultimately belong to the void. Luo Nan had no intention to look down on these people, for his first-hand witness of the human-faced arachnids, two replays told him one fact. The visualization diagram wasn't a mystery. It was something that could be explained at any time. An extremely complicated infrastructure was contained inside, an extremely profound foundational theory. All Luo Nan could see was just a high-level abstraction and nothing more. The two playbacks, especially the second, proved that the operations of the visualized diagram already completely exceeded his level of comprehension. He didn't overestimate his own judgment skills, so he didn't try in vain to go analyze the principles behind the diagram in deeper detail. The mocking audience, however, was like the pot who calls the kettle black. All Luo Nan could do right now was to maintain his reverence towards the unknown, to continue to observe and confirm what was to come. Therefore Luo Nan gave it his all to concentrate on the changes that were occurring on the fighting stage. His perspective was a combination of the material and the mental plane, and it also seeped with the understanding of the turbid flow of emotions. Every second of observation and perception brought along a shocking consumption of energy. The price for all this was well worth it. The human-faced arachnid and Rui Wen physical image turned gradually hazy from Luo Nan's perspective. Likewise, the fighting stage and even the entire fighting arena turned hazy as well. All of this turned into a picture that was directly perceived through the senses and filled with symbolic meaning. Luo Nan saw a burning sea of clouds. The human-faced arachnid was a spider demon swimming about the sea of clouds. Rui Wen was the one and only glistening star in the turbid cloud sea. Her splendor was penetrating and sharp. The scattering rays of the star were the biting cold light of a sword's edge. The human-faced arachnid orbited around this star, constantly approaching closer and closer, driving the turbid flow of emotions and covering its aura. But no matter how much the mist of negative emotions surged like the tide around the star, the ice-cold blade aura cut its way through to make not even an ounce of filth pollute Rui Wen. The star blade edge was being tempered and refined during the entire course of events. The aura it emitted grew sharper and sharper. Dozens of hundreds of heavy blows assaulted the star, but the great amounts of turbid emotions weren't able to leap over to Rui Wen. They were transformed into nothingness by the suspending and illuminating sharp aura. But no matter how much of the sea was extinguished, the burning cloud sea advanced wave upon wave. Howling curses came from within the cloud sea, all provided by the incessantly excited audience. This was a herd of stupid swine and lamb that had its blood already drawn by a blade. They were completely ignorant of the fact that this confined fighting arena had turned into an enormous altar, and that their life force energy was the blood that flowed arbitrarily atop the altar. It was the sole pigment that painted the scene of the burning cloud sea. At last, the human-faced arachnid hissed and took the initiative to launch a material attack, throwing itself at Rui Wen. But through enduring the heavy myriad assaults of the turbid burning clouds, Rui Wen's star blade edge had been tempered to a new level. The blade edge aura shined upon the human-faced arachnid before it had truly gotten close, slashing countless fine cuts over its body. This wasn't an act, it truly had been injured. Luo Nan could feel the human-faced arachnid's pain, but a feeling of delight was also conveyed at the deepest level of its response. Delight. The human-faced arachnid continued to push forward to truly cross paths with the star blade edge. One of its limbs got severed. It fell into the burning cloud sea, igniting with a rumble. The human-faced arachnid made a long hiss in pain, but it turned and threw itself over and ate its own burning limb with a single bite. It trembled with excitement. The aura of the arachnid had weakened over this process, but then it clearly turned much more solid, and the hazy state of its corresponding foundational structure turned for the better as well. So it was like this all along. Luo Nan understood at last. The corresponding information had been analyzed at this moment, and it flowed through his mind. It was without a doubt that the human-faced arachnid was utilizing Rui Wen. It had discovered Rui Wen's ability, but it couldn't directly consume her due to being intimidated by Luo Nan's order. It had used a roundabout method to exploit her ability for its own gain. The human-faced arachnid wanted to use Rui Wen to reach a sort of dynamic equilibrium. It kept attacking, kept pressuring, but it maintained control of the intensity to temper Rui Wen's star blade aura to become sharper and sharper, all for the sake of making her truly become a threat towards it. It was very bizarre just thinking about it, but these were the facts. The human-faced arachnid was incapable of growing its own self. It had to consume foreign material, including its own species, to achieve its own evolution. The current scene was just a variation of consuming. The human-faced arachnid was borrowing Rui Wen's star blade aura to slice off its hazy and unstable sections and reconstruct its foundation. Even if the arachnid was riddled with 1,000 holes, even if its limbs get smashed and splattered, as long as it wasn't truly fatal, the arachnid would gladly endure the pain. And naturally, the loss of its energy was constantly being replenished by the stupid hogs and lambs in its surroundings. It was these people who solely bore all the damage. This method was filled with a flavor of deviousness and desperation. It matched the human-faced arachnid's image quite well. From the arachnid's perspective, this environment, which it had single-handedly established, was just like a whetstone, a forge, and an altar, and it threw itself atop of it. Interesting enough, Rui Wen was the one to receive the most benefits from this situation. Until now, Luo Nan still didn't know what ability Rui Wen would ultimately awaken to. But when looking at the desperate appearance of the human-faced arachnid, he could see that she had shocking potential. But the stimulation of an external object was needed to excite her ability. Her pure and penetrating mental state was able to take on the turbulent, muddy waters and still remain untainted by even a speck of dust, even after 100, 1,000 scouring waves. And so Rui Wen was on the altar as well. The human-faced arachnid was exploiting her, and she was exploiting the arachnid as well. The two were exploiting and polishing each other to push themselves to higher levels, and their limits were yet to be seen. This scene may not be completely true. Nevertheless, it was a part that Luo Nan was able to deduce and understand. Its complete composition was secretly related to Luo Nan's visualized diagram. Rui Wen and the human-faced arachnid stood at the core. They could be said to be the inscribed sphere. They represented the continual operation of an endogenous force. The fighting arena was the sealed boundary of the figure. It was the outer scribed sphere. It represented the external environment and the source of power. And the tetrahedron, wasn't it none other than Luo Nan? The human-faced arachnid came from Luo Nan's system. All of its actions were essentially part of the variations and extensions of his system. So ultimately, Luo Nan himself was who supplied this framework. As his comprehension increased in his mind, Luo Nan suddenly understood where the energy consumption of his act of observing went. It was the price and challenge, that had to be paid when acting as the bearer. He wasn't standing on the altar, he was the altar. Whether or not Luo Nan's pyramid structure could hold the endlessly rising levels of the two, whether or not it could assume their surging powers, whether or not it could supply them with enough support, were all key in determining the success of this sacrificial ritual. The framework would collapse with a loss in equilibrium. There were only two cases for this. Either Rui Wen slays the human-faced arachnid, or the human-faced arachnid destroys Rui Wen. Even if Rui Wen perishes, the human-faced arachnid would not necessarily have disobeyed Luo Nan's will. This would just be a failure of the total framework. Of course, this would mean that Luo Nan would be forced to take on the recall from the collapse of the framework. The situation that would emerge then was completely unknown. Human-faced arachnid, spoke Luo Nan through gritted teeth. Then a spotlight came shining down from atop the fighting stage, illuminating an area to the corner. The on-site DJ let out a long whistle that was like an airplane streaking across the skies. This has been a very long wait for the bloody future. The Beast King battle that you all have been waiting for, our other leading character, has arrived. The exclamation of the final syllable was like a groan, but it caused every one of the audience to have one of their heartstrings plucked lightly as an effect. The whistling that followed caused the entire fighting arena to rock. The bloody flames of the incorporeal altar burned harder. That's a wrap for this installment. Thank you all for watching and supporting Lord of the Stories. If you enjoyed this tale, please hit the like button, share it, and subscribe for more amazing stories. You can also explore other series updated daily in our playlists. Have a fantastic day and see you in the next episode.